Hi, my name is Denva Gallant, and I am a medievalist. And today I'm very happy to share one of my favorite illuminated manuscripts from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So, in a codicil added to her will shortly before her death in 1371, John Devereux left to Charles V, the reigning king, a very small book of prayers that Charles IV, God keep his soul, had made for Madame, which Pucelle illuminated. Her manuscript is now widely identified as the Hours of Jeanne Devereux, which I'm showing you here. This is a tiny manuscript. It's made up of 209 folios, which include 25 full-page paintings with paired images from the infancy and passion of Christ and scenes of the life of St. Louis, the Queen's ancestor. In the margins, close to 700 illustrations depict the bishops, beggars, street dancers, maidens, and musicians that peopled the streets of medieval Paris, as well as apes, rabbits, dogs, and creatures of sheer fantasy. John's Book of Hours included texts that were meant to be said at regular intervals throughout the 24-hour day. The practice of praying at multiple times of the day and night was based upon the divine office, a liturgy chanted in religious communities that gathered for prayer at matins, before daybreak, lauds, prime, terce, sex, which was around noon, none, vespers, and compline after sunset. Yes, that is a lot of praying, but one's salvation during the Middle Ages, especially for Christians, was tied up in prayer, so we shouldn't be that surprised. Here, in this particular opening that I'm sharing with you, we are considering the betrayal of Christ, and that's to your left, and the Annunciation on the right. This manuscript, art historians believe, was given to John by her husband, King Charles IV of France, at the time of their marriage. Now, Jeanne was very young at this time when she married her cousin, the King of France, just 14. And we, as art historians, like to think about this manuscript in terms of the context within which it was given. A young woman, 14 years old, given a prayer book by her husband, who was quite a years older than her. So how might this manuscript have instructed her, guided her devotions, shown her how to be a good wife? So with that in mind, I want us to take a closer look at the Annunciation on the right. So the Annunciation, the moment when the angel Gabriel comes to the Virgin Mary and announces that she will bear the Christ child. It's important here to see how much space that moment occupies within the manuscript. More than half, it dominates. We see the Virgin Mary being met by Gabriel, and she holds a book in her hand, right? We think about at this time the reading Virgin Mary and why reading was so important. And here, as an exemplar to the young John, a woman who conceives and bears children holds a book. Now, if we move a little bit further down here towards the bottom where you see perhaps that beautiful expanse of red, that is actually an initial that starts off with Domine, which is just Lord or God. If you look very closely in that initial down towards the bottom of the page, you'll see a representation of John, and she's reading a text as well. The page is opened up, and we see the young queen crowned looking, reading. And in such a way, we can begin to think about the recursive manner in which John, reading this manuscript, is looking at an image of herself reading this manuscript and also looking at the Virgin who's reading. The edifying principle here is that the Virgin read. Think about her as an exemplar. You are reading, and through that reading, you gain moral fortitude. I want to draw your attention to one other aspect of this that's really fun for me. So again, locked in that initial, you see that red expanse here, hopefully. She's guarded by what's known as essential with a candle, which is also a symbol of fertility. And so we can begin to think about this enclosure, this inscribing here, this guarding of that young queen and her virtue being enacted visually on the page. One other really exciting part of this opening or this page of the manuscript is what's happening down here. So if we consider the upper half of the page as being sacred, as being religious, edifying our young queen and religious instruction through the exemplar of the Virgin Mary, then we kind of find something very curious happening towards this lower register, where we have what we consider a kind of froggy in the middle, a game that was played during the Middle Ages. It wasn't a very, let's say, religiously edifying game that's being played here. It's a party game, right? So within the margins of this sacred text, we're seeing exactly how John shouldn't behave. She shouldn't be teasing young men, as we see happening here. This woman is grabbing this young man by the arm. The other one, who stands up just to the right, is pulling his hair. And then yet another woman is trying to pull her away. Interestingly, this notion of being on the margins of society, on the margins of what is morally right, is enacted also on this page. When we think about seclusion and isolation, as we might be warranted to do during this time, it's interesting to think about medieval books, as they were a gateway into devotion, but also into instruction. I'm really happy and pleased to have been able to share this wonderful manuscript with you today. And I hope that you will go on to the Metropolitan website and look at it there.